In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower control arm on this Honda Accord. This will be located inside of your front wheel well. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the front of your vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. You'll find that you have a 17mm headed bolt that comes through from the front, through the control arm, all the way along the backside of that strut area. Use a 17mm for both sides. Let's get this out of here. Now we'll remove the bolt by driving it out from the rear towards the front. A quick inspection and we'll set it aside. Now we'll continue on to where the sway bar link connects to your lower control arm. You'll find that you have a 14mm nut. Commonly for this, you can use an Allen head directly in the center of the stud of the sway bar link. Hold that stud and use a 14mm to remove the nut. Ours is completely rusted. Let's get my swivel socket on here. Use a 32mm to remove your axle nut. Hammer and punch right in the center here. We want to try to get some movement from the axle and the wheel bearing. Now we can continue at that ball joint. For the ball joint, you'll find that you should have a cotter pin holding your nut in place. Remove the cotter pin and then remove your 17mm nut. With the nut off of there, we can continue on separating the ball joint from the lower control arm. Sometimes for this, you'd want to use some sort of ball joint separator so you don't damage the ball joint. If you don't have one of those, you could use a hammer, and we'll just carefully start tapping along the control arm here to cause vibration and allow penetrant to make its way in between the ball joint and the control arm. Okay, we've got that separated. Now that we have that separated, let's give this a quick inspection just to ensure that we did not damage the ball joint in any way. Ours still looks fine. We can continue on to our 2 mounting bolts that hold the control arm to the subframe. To remove the forward mounting bolt, we'll be using a 19mm. Once we have it all the way out, we'll give it a quick inspection and then just start it back in a couple threads. After that, make your way to the 14mm rearward bolt. Let's take hold of that control arm. We're going to give it a wiggle. Once we pull it down and out of the wishbone here, we'll continue on by pulling it outward along this rearward area here. If you have a hard time tugging on it, you can also use a pry bar. Just gently pry. While we continue on, we're going to pivot this area out along the front. And there it is, friends. All right, let's get ready for the installation of our brand new lower control arm. The installation process will be the reverse of the removal. Make our way in here, starting it along the front. After you've done so, continue on by taking hold of your caliper. We're going to pull the knuckle towards the rear and out. At the same time, we'll swing the control arm into the proper position. Just continue pulling this. Now we'll just swing this up into place. Once again, you can use a pry bar, and if you need to, a rubber mallet. With that in place, we'll continue on along the front here. Use a rod, or if you had to, a screwdriver. Come up through the center here. What we're paying attention to is this bushing. You might find that it's at an angle when it's sitting in place here. We need to actually be lined up with those bolt holes. So I'll use this just to get it as close as possible. Now we can start putting the bolt up through here. If you find that it's still at an angle, but you can't turn it any further with that rod or screwdriver, go ahead and put your socket right on the bolt head here. You should be able to pivot it just enough that you can continue pressing it up into the right position. There we are. Now it's starting in by hand. Make our way towards the back side here. Just going to continue on with the pry bar to get this aligned. Start on the ball joint nut, bottom it out, and then torque it to 65 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing you want to pay attention to is the slots that are on the nut in comparison to the hole that goes through the center of your stud. Make sure they're aligned. If for some reason it's not, continue on tightening the nut until the very next slot is. After you've done that, you can put in a locking cotter pin. Slide that right on through there. And then pin it over so there's no way it can loosen up on you while you're driving down the road. Let's put on the lower sway bar link nut. We'll snug this up and then torque it to 22 foot-pounds. We'll align this as needed, put the bolt in from the front towards the rear. Just slide it right on through. You may have to raise or lower the suspension as needed. At this point, we'll continue on putting pressure underneath the lower control arm, being careful not to damage our lower ball joint stud. What we need to do is apply pressure in the upward manner so that it brings the vehicle into the original ride height position. We'll use our 17 millimeters to snug this bolt, and then we'll torque it to 47 foot-pounds. Now let's follow that control arm to our two inward bolts, starting with the rear bolt. We'll snug that and then torque that to 47 foot-pounds as well. Moving ahead, we'll snug this with a 19 millimeter and then torque it to 61 foot-pounds. Remove the support from underneath your control arm. The next thing we'll do is apply a thin amount of clean motor oil along the backside or the seating side of the nut. Start that axle nut in place onto your axle, and then you want to make sure that you bottom this out with a ratchet by hand. After you've bottomed out the axle nut by hand, it's going to be time to torque it. What you'll find is when you go to turn this to torque it, it's going to spin the brake rotor on you. You could have a second person inside the vehicle stepping on the brake. That'll hold it still. Or if you're doing it by yourself, just use a pry bar in between the studs diagonally down to the ground. That'll hold this in place, and we can continue torquing this to 134 foot-pounds. After it's torqued, the next thing that you want to do is pay attention to the shaft on the axle. You'll find that it has a small notch in it. You have to use a hammer and punch and drive the axle nut down into this area. That'll lock it in position. Once you've confirmed that that's torqued, we can continue on to reinstalling our wheel. Reinstall your wheel, start on all the lug nuts, and then torque them to 80 foot-pounds. With the wheel on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Okay, friend, we've got the car back together. At this point, take it for a road test and get yourself a four-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.